30 days of feminist TikTok content turned my wife into someone I didn't recognize. But on day 31, she found out the man she married was already gone. It started with something so small I almost missed it. We were loading the dishwasher after dinner, something we'd done together for 3 years without a single argument. I was rinsing plates while she arranged them in the rack. Normal Tuesday evening routine. "You know what's interesting," she said, holding up a wine glass. "I always end up doing the detailed work while you just rinse and hand things over." I paused. "Want to switch?" "That's not the point." She set the glass down harder than necessary. "It's about the mental load. The invisible labor." Mental load. Invisible labor. These weren't phrases she'd ever used before. Something had changed in her vocabulary, and I could trace it back to about a week ago, when she'd started spending hours scrolling through her phone, earbuds in, completely absorbed. "Okay," I said, truly curious. "What would you prefer?" "I shouldn't have to prefer anything. You should just see it." This was new territory. In 3 years of marriage, we'd never had a conversation that felt like I was being tested on material I hadn't, clear's throat, studied. I finished rinsing the last plate and handed it to her. "I see you doing detailed work because you're better at organizing the dishwasher than I am. I see me rinsing because I'm faster at it." I thought we were being efficient. She loaded the plate with careful precision. Efficiency isn't the point when it reinforces traditional gender roles. Traditional gender roles. Another new addition to her vocabulary. That night, she stayed up until almost midnight. Phone glowing in the dark bedroom. I could hear the short, repeating audio clips that meant TikTok. When I asked if she was coming to bed, she just held up one finger. Just one more video. The next morning, she was different. Not dramatically, but enough that I noticed. She questioned why I always drove when we went out together. She asked why I handled the bills when she was perfectly capable. She wondered out loud why she always remembered her sister's birthday, but I needed reminding about my own family's dates. Fair questions, all of them. But the tone was wrong. It wasn't curiosity. It was accusation. By day 5, the pattern was clear. Every interaction was being filtered through some new lens she'd gained. When I held the door open, she mentioned how women were capable of opening their own doors. When I complimented her dress, she asked if I'd ever complimented her intelligence with the same enthusiasm. "I compliment your intelligence all the time," I said. "Do you, though, or do you just agree with me?" I started paying attention to what she was consuming online. The algorithm had pulled her deep into content about female empowerment, toxic masculinity, and relationship dynamics. Hours every day, the creators all seemed to be speaking directly to her situation, confirming feelings she hadn't even known she had. "You realize these videos are designed to make you angry, right?" I said one evening as she came out of another 2-hour scroll session. She looked at me like I'd just proven their point. There it is. Dismissing women's concerns as just emotion. I'm not dismissing anything. I'm saying social media algorithms profit from keeping you engaged, and anger is the most engaging emotion. "So, you're saying I'm too stupid to think for myself?" This was the new dynamic. Every conversation was a possible trap. Every comment I made was evidence of some deeper problem with my character. She'd found a framework that explained every small frustration in our relationship. And that framework had a very clear villain. The breaking point came on day 12. I'd worked late and came home to find her in the kitchen, phone propped against the fruit bowl, filming herself. "And that's exactly what I mean about weaponized incompetence," she was saying to the camera. "He'll do the dishes, but he'll do them wrong so that I have to redo them. It's manipulation." I'd never done the dishes wrong on purpose in my life. But according to her video, my real mistakes were actually planned moves to avoid housework. "We need to talk," I said once she'd finished recording. She looked up from her phone, already defensive. "About what?" "About the fact that you just told the internet I manipulate you through weaponized incompetence. Do you deny it?" "Yes, I deny it completely." She showed me her phone. The video had 37 comments, all from women sharing their own stories of similar manipulation. The validation was instant and overwhelming. "Look at this," she said, scrolling through the responses. I'm not crazy. This is a real thing. I never said you were crazy, but you're describing behavior that isn't happening. Maybe you don't realize you're doing it. Or maybe you're looking for problems that don't exist. The conversation ended there. She went back to her phone, and I went to bed alone. By day 15, she'd found her community, a group of women who'd all discovered the same content, all going through similar realizations about their relationships. They messaged constantly, sharing screenshots of conversations with their partners, analyzing every word for hidden meaning. I watched my wife disappear into this new identity. The woman who used to laugh at my jokes now examined them for signs of condescension. The woman who used to appreciate my help now read it as a threat to her independence. The saddest part was watching her lose herself and trying to become someone else's idea of empowered. She traded her own judgment for the approval of strangers on the internet. But I wasn't about to lose myself in the process. 3 weeks in, I made a decision. I wouldn't argue with the algorithm. I wouldn't compete with the validation she was getting online. I wouldn't try to convince her that our relationship was healthier than her new framework suggested. Instead, I'd let her follow this path to its logical conclusion, because I knew something she didn't yet understand. The internet might tell you who you should be, but it can't tell you who you actually are. And when the performance ended, when the cameras stopped rolling and the comments stopped coming, she'd have to face the real consequences of treating her husband like the enemy. That's when she'd discover I was already gone. Week 4 brought a new level of absurdity. She'd moved from questioning our dishwasher routine to analyzing every part of our life through her newly acquired feminist lens. Everything was problematic. Everything was evidence of patriarchal oppression. I came home from work to find her waiting in the living room, phone in hand, ready to document our interaction. "How was your day?" I asked, hanging up my jacket. "Interesting that you hung your jacket right there," she said, filming, right where I have to see it every time I walk through the room. I stared at the coat hook. The same coat hook I'd used for 3 years. The same coat hook she'd never mentioned before. "Where would you prefer I hang it?" It's not about where I prefer. It's about how men assume public spaces belong to them. Public spaces. We were talking about our own living room. "This is our home," I said. "Not a public space." She held up the phone. See, he immediately gets defensive when his behavior is questioned. Classic fragile masculinity. I looked directly at the camera. "Hi, Internet. I hung my jacket on the hook in my own house. Alert the authorities." She stopped filming. "You're not taking this seriously. You're filming me hanging up my jacket and calling it oppression. How seriously should I take it?" This was the new pattern. Every normal interaction was potential content. Every ordinary moment was evidence of some deeper systemic problem. She'd found a way to be constantly offended by the normal reality of living with another human being. The grocery shopping incident was peak absurdity. I'd offered to carry the heavy bags, something I'd done automatically for years. She documented this, too, explaining to her followers how men use physical strength to remind women of their dependence. "I can carry my own bags," she announced loudly enough for other shoppers to hear. "I know you can," I said, adjusting my grip on the cases of water. I was being helpful. Helpful, or reinforcing gender stereotypes. I set the bags down in the parking lot. "You carry them, then?" She stared at me like I'd just suggested she carry them on her head. The bags were heavy. I'd been carrying them because they were heavy, not because she was helpless. "That's not the point," she said. "What is the point?" "The point is that you should want to examine these patterns." I picked up the bags and loaded them into the car. I examined them. I concluded that I carry heavy things because I'm stronger, not because I think you're inferior. That night, she made a video about the grocery store confrontation. According to her narrative, I'd used my physical strength to humiliate her in public. The comments were full of women sharing similar stories of male intimidation through helpful behavior. I watched from the kitchen as she read the responses, nodding along with each validation. She'd found her tribe, and they were all convinced that common courtesy was actually psychological warfare. "You know what's funny?" I said, joining her on the couch. "A month ago, if I hadn't offered to carry those bags, you would have been annoyed." "That's internalized misogyny," she replied without looking up from her phone. Internalized misogyny. The perfect answer to any contradiction. If she disagreed with her past self, it was internalized misogyny. If she disagreed with other women, it was internalized misogyny. If she disagreed with anything that didn't fit the narrative, it was internalized misogyny. The framework was bulletproof because it was impossible to prove wrong. Week 5 brought the rules, actual written rules that she developed after consulting with her online community. They were posted on the refrigerator like a dormitory code of conduct. No opening doors for me unless I specifically ask. No carrying things for me unless I specifically ask. No making decisions that affect both of us without consulting me first. No assuming I want help with anything. I read through the list twice. These are all things you used to appreciate. I'm decolonizing my expectations, she said, using another phrase that had appeared in her vocabulary recently. Decolonizing. We're married. We're on the same team. Are we? Or are you just comfortable with the power dynamic? I looked around our kitchen at the coffee maker I'd programmed to start automatically so she could have coffee ready when she woke up, at the meal planning calendar we created together, at the photos of our vacations, our friends, our life. What power dynamic? I asked. She gestured vaguely at everything. This whole setup benefits you more than me. How you get to be the default decision maker? I get to be the helper. I'm not the default decision maker. We decide things together. Do we? Or do you just let me think we do? This was the trap. Every collaborative decision we'd ever made was reframed as my manipulation. Every time she'd agreed with me was evidence that I'd somehow coerced her. Every happy moment in our relationship was actually me getting my way at her expense. The algorithm had given her a story that explained everything. And in that story, I was the villain. But I wasn't going to play the villain in someone else's performance. You know what? I said, taking the rules down from the refrigerator. You're right. I have been making too many decisions for both of us. She looked surprised. Really? Really? Starting tomorrow, you handle everything. All the decisions, all the planning, all the responsibility. That's not what I meant. Sure it is. You want equality. You've got it. No more opening doors. No more carrying things. No more assuming you want help. No more making decisions that affect both of us. I crumpled up the rules and threw them in the trash. Welcome to true independence. She stood there looking confused, like she'd expected me to argue with her demands rather than agree with them. I didn't mean you should stop caring about me. I care about you plenty, but I won't be treated like an oppressor for showing it. That night, she posted about the conversation, framing it as a victory. She'd set boundaries, and I'd respected them. Her followers congratulated her on training her husband to be more conscious of his privilege, but I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. The rules had been designed to make me argue, to make me defensive, to prove that I was the controlling partner she'd been told I was. Instead, I'd given her exactly what she'd asked for. And she was starting to realize that getting what you ask for isn't always the same as getting what you want. The real test was coming, because independence is a lot harder than dependence. And equality requires more than just pointing out problems. It requires actually solving them yourself. Day 23 brought the intervention. I came home to find 3 women sitting in my living room, each with their phones out, ready to record my education. We need to talk, my wife announced, gesturing to the makeshift tribunal she'd assembled. I recognized 2 of them from her social media posts. The third was a stranger, but she had the same expectant look of someone who'd been promised a front-row seat to a toxic masculinity exposure. About what? I asked, setting down my keys. About your behavior and how it's affecting our relationship. I looked at the 3 women all staring at me like I was a specimen to be studied. And this requires an audience. It requires accountability, said the stranger. I'm here as a neutral party. Neutral party? Right. A complete stranger who'd gotten her information entirely from my wife's social media posts was going to be neutral. I'm not doing this, I said. See, my wife pointed at me. This is exactly what I mean. He refuses to engage with criticism. I refuse to be ambushed in my own home, I corrected. There's a difference. One of the women held up her phone. Would you mind if we recorded this? For educational purposes. Yes, I would mind. And no, you can't record anything in my house without my permission. The stranger leaned forward. Don't you think it's important to examine patterns of behavior that might be harmful? I think it's important to have private conversations in private, I said. Not perform them for social media. My wife stood up. This is what I'm talking about. He's controlling the narrative by refusing to participate. I'm not controlling anything. I'm protecting my privacy. Privacy is a privilege, the stranger said, and privilege needs to be examined. I almost laughed. Privacy is a right, and I'm exercising it. The three women exchanged glances. This wasn't going according to their script. They'd expected me to either submit to their interrogation or lose my temper, proving their point about toxic masculinity. You know what your problem is? I said to my wife. You've replaced thinking with performing. You don't want to solve problems. You want to document them. That's dismissive, said one of the women. That's accurate, I replied. When did you last have a conversation with me that wasn't potential content for your followers? My wife looked uncomfortable. That's not what this is about. This is exactly what this is about. You've turned our relationship into a social media case study. I walked to the door and held it open. Ladies, this has been educational, but the show is over. The stranger stood up. We're trying to help you become a better partner. I didn't ask for help, and I don't need strangers analyzing my marriage. We're not strangers, my wife said. They're my friends. They're your online audience, I corrected. There's a difference. The women filed out, phones still recording until the last moment. I closed the door and turned to face my wife. That was humiliating, she said. For who? For me. You made me look bad in front of my friends. I made you look bad. You invited strangers to our home to interrogate me without my consent. They're not strangers. They're part of my support system. Your support system for what? Leaving me. She didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Maybe, she said finally. There it was. The truth. She'd been circling it for weeks. The intervention hadn't been about improving our relationship. It had been about building a case for ending it. Then why haven't you? I asked. Because I'm trying to save us. By ambushing me with your online friends, by making you see how your behavior affects me. I sat down on the couch. You want to know how behavior affects people? Let me tell you how your behavior has affected me. She crossed her arms, ready for another performance. 3 weeks ago, you were my wife. Now you're a content creator who happens to live in my house. You don't talk to me anymore. You interrogate me. You don't share experiences with me. You document them for strangers. I'm finding my voice, she said. You're losing yourself, and you're losing us. Maybe this wasn't as good as I thought it was. I nodded. Maybe you're right. That caught her off guard. She'd expected me to fight for us, to argue that we were fine. To prove that I was the problem by refusing to accept her new reality. You're not going to defend our relationship? She asked. I'm not going to defend our relationship to people who've already decided it's toxic, including you. So, you're giving up? I'm accepting reality. You've spent 3 weeks telling me everything that's wrong with me, with us, with our life together. You've documented every complaint for an audience of strangers. You've invited people into our home to confront me about behaviors you've interpreted as oppressive. I stood up. You want to know what's oppressive? Having someone you love treat you like a project to be fixed. I never said you were a project. You didn't have to. Your entire online presence is about fixing me, changing me, educating me. When did I become the enemy? She was quiet for a long moment. You're not the enemy. Then why are you treating me like one? Because the algorithm. Because the content. Because everyone says. Everyone says what? She looked lost. Everyone says that if you're not uncomfortable, you're not growing. And you think the only way to grow is to be miserable. I think the only way to grow is to question everything, including whether you want to be married to me. Another long silence. Maybe especially that, she said. I walked toward the bedroom. Well, when you figure out the answer to that question, let me know. But I won't be part of any more interventions. Where are you going? To pack a bag. I'm staying at my brother's place tonight. You're leaving. I'm giving you space to figure out who you want to be without an audience. That's not what I want. Then what do you want? She stood there, phone in her hand, ready to document this moment, too. But for the first time in weeks, she didn't raise it. She just looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time in a month. I don't know, she said quietly. When you do know, call me. But I won't be performed for anymore. I packed a bag while she sat on the bed watching silently. No phone, no camera, no audience, just a woman who'd spent so much time trying to become someone else that she'd forgotten who she actually was, and a man who'd realized that love without respect isn't love at all. It's just an elaborate performance with a very unhappy ending. 3 days at my brother's place gave me clarity I hadn't had in weeks. Away from the constant documentation and analysis, I could think clearly about what had happened to my marriage and what I needed to do about it. She called on the second day. When are you coming home? When you're ready to have a real conversation, not a performance. I miss you, she said. And for a moment, she sounded like the woman I'd married. I miss you, too. But I don't miss being treated like a villain in your social media story. It's not like that. It's exactly like that. Every interaction we have ends up online. Every conversation becomes content. She was quiet for a moment. Maybe we could start over. Starting over means stopping the performance. No phones, no recording, no posting about our private conversations. I can't just stop sharing my experiences. You can stop sharing our experiences without my consent. The call ended without resolution. But something had shifted. She'd called me, not the other way around. The intervention had backfired. Instead of breaking me down, it had shown her what life looked like when I wasn't there to be her content. On day 4, I went back to the house while she was at work. I needed to assess the situation clearly and prepare for whatever came next. What I found was revealing. Our joint bank account showed charges I didn't recognize. Ring lights, professional microphone equipment, a subscription to some content creation platform. She wasn't just consuming this content anymore. She was investing in becoming a creator herself. I found notebooks filled with content ideas, most of them centered around my journey with a toxic partner. Video scripts describing conversations we'd never had. Post drafts that exaggerated every minor disagreement into evidence of emotional abuse. The woman I'd married was becoming a fiction writer, and I was her main character. The problem was that her version of me bore no resemblance to reality. I photographed everything, not for social media, but for documentation. If this was heading toward divorce, I wanted evidence of what had really happened versus what she was claiming online. Then I did something I'd never done before. I opened her laptop. Her browser history was a rabbit hole of feminist content, dating advice for women leaving toxic relationships, and articles about financial independence after divorce. She'd been planning this for longer than I'd realized. But the most revealing discovery was her private messages with her online support group. They weren't just validating her complaints. They were actively encouraging her to leave me. Complete strangers who'd never met me were advising her to document everything, build a case, and prepare for the worst. You need to protect yourself, one message read. Men like him always escalate when they lose control. Men like him. They'd created an entire profile of who I was based on her curated complaints. I was apparently manipulative, controlling, and potentially dangerous. The fact that I'd never shown any of these behaviors was irrelevant. The pattern fit their narrative, so the pattern must be true. I closed the laptop and sat in our kitchen, looking around at the life we'd built together. 3 years of shared decisions, compromises, and genuine partnership. 3 years of supporting each other's goals and dreams. 3 years of building something real. All of it was being rewritten to fit someone else's story about toxic masculinity. When she came home that evening, I was waiting in the living room. "You're back," she said, looking genuinely relieved. "We need to talk. Really talk. We need to talk. Really talk." No phones, no recording, no posting about it later. She hesitated, then nodded and sat down across from me. I found the equipment you bought, I said. The ring lights, the microphone, the content platform subscription. Her face flushed. I was going to tell you about that. Were you? Or were you going to surprise me by making our marriage your full-time content? It's not like that. It's exactly like that. You've turned me into a character in your story, and not a very flattering character. She didn't deny it. I also saw your browser history, I continued. The articles about leaving toxic relationships. The financial independence guides. The divorce preparation checklists. You went through my computer. You went through our marriage and turned it into content for strangers. I think privacy concerns are a little one-sided here. She sat back. I read those articles. I was just researching. Researching how to leave me while building a public case for why I deserved it. That's not fair. Read me one message from your support group that doesn't assume I'm fundamentally broken. She couldn't do it, because there weren't any. Her online friends had decided I was toxic before they'd ever heard my side of anything. I was guilty by virtue of being a man who didn't immediately submit to their framework. They're trying to help me, she said weakly. They're trying to validate a narrative. There's a difference. I leaned forward. Do you know what's really toxic? Strangers analyzing your marriage based on one-sided social media posts. You know what's actually manipulative? Presenting yourself as a victim of behaviors that aren't happening. My feelings are valid, she said, falling back on another phrase from her online vocabulary. Your feelings are valid. Your interpretation of reality is questionable. So, you're saying I'm crazy. I'm saying you're confused. There's a difference. For the first time in weeks, she looked uncertain instead of righteous. What do you want from me? She asked. I want you to choose. Do you want to be married to me, or do you want to be a content creator whose marriage is her main storyline? Why can't I be both? Because you can't build a real relationship while performing a fake one for strangers. She was quiet for a long time. What if I can't go back to how things were? Then we don't go back. We go forward. But we go forward together, or we don't go at all. And if you choose the content creation, then you choose it alone. I won't be a character in someone else's story about toxic masculinity. You're giving me an ultimatum. I'm giving you a choice. There's a difference. She looked around the room like she was seeing it for the first time. I don't know who I am anymore. You're the woman I married. The question is whether you remember how to be her. What if she wasn't good enough? Good enough for who? Your followers? Random strangers on the internet? Good enough for me. The woman I married was plenty good enough for herself. She didn't need validation from strangers to know her worth. That night, she deleted her content creation apps, but she didn't delete her accounts. She wasn't ready to give up the validation completely. She was just hedging her bets. I knew then that the choice had already been made. She'd chosen the performance over reality. She'd chosen strangers over her husband. She just hadn't admitted it to herself yet. Day 28 brought the nuclear option. I discovered she'd been secretly recording our conversations for the past week. Audio clips of me asking simple questions edited to make me sound controlling. Video of me doing normal household tasks narrated with theories about weaponized incompetence. She decided to go public with our entire relationship. I found out when my phone started buzzing with messages from friends. Dude, is this really how you talk to her? Man, you should probably see what she's posting about you. The video had been live for 6 hours. In it, she detailed our toxic dynamic with carefully edited audio clips as evidence. She'd made me sound like a controlling monster by removing context from every conversation. When she got home, I was sitting in the living room with my laptop open, her video playing on repeat. We need to discuss your new career in fiction writing, I said. She saw the screen and her face went pale. You weren't supposed to see that yet. Yet. When exactly was I supposed to see my wife publicly destroying my reputation? I'm telling my truth. You're telling a carefully edited version designed to make me look like a villain. Those are real recordings. With all the context removed. You recorded me asking if you wanted coffee and made it sound like I was demanding you serve me. She stood there holding her phone like a shield. People need to know what emotional abuse looks like. People need to know what defamation looks like, and you just provided a master class. You can't stop me from sharing my experiences. Watch me. I turned the laptop around so she could see the screen. I'd been busy while she was at work. Screenshots of every post she'd made about our relationship. Documentation of her private messages encouraging other women to leave their partners. Evidence of her planning this public campaign for weeks. What is this? She asked. Insurance. See, while you were creating fiction about me, I was documenting facts about you, including the messages where you admit to editing conversations to make them sound worse. Her hands were shaking. You can't use private messages. You use private conversations. I'm just returning the favor. That's different. It's exactly the same, except my evidence is unedited. I stood up and walked to the window. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to delete that video and post a retraction. You're going to admit that you edited the audio to misrepresent our conversations. I won't do that. Then I'll post everything I have, including the messages where your online friends encouraged you to fabricate abuse allegations for content. You're bluffing. I opened a new browser tab and logged into my social media account. Try me. She watched as I began typing a post with screenshots attached. Her edited conversations next to the unedited originals. Her private messages about planning to destroy my reputation. Her browser history showing she'd researched divorce tactics before any of our problems started. Stop, she said quietly. Delete your video first. You don't understand. I'll lose all my followers. You should have thought about that before you decided to lie about me for content. I didn't lie. I just emphasized certain aspects. You committed fraud. Social media fraud, but fraud nonetheless. She started crying. This isn't who I wanted to be. Then stop being her. It took her 20 minutes to delete everything. The video, the posts, the carefully crafted narrative about our toxic relationship. Her followers were confused and angry. Some accused me of forcing her to recant. Others questioned whether anything she'd said was true. There, she said, showing me her empty timeline. It's gone. Good. Now, pack a bag. What? You heard me. Pack a bag. You've got 24 hours to figure out where you're going. You can't kick me out. This is my house, too. You're right. It is your house, which is why I'm leaving instead. Where are you going? Somewhere I won't be secretly recorded and turned into content. But we can work this out now. I deleted everything. You deleted the evidence. You didn't delete the mindset that created it. I grabbed my jacket and keys. When you're ready to be a wife instead of a content creator, call me. But I won't live with someone who sees me as material instead of a partner. Please don't go. You chose strangers over your husband. Now you get to live with that choice. The door closed behind me with finality. My phone buzzed with notifications as her remaining followers tried to piece together what had happened. Some defended her, others demanded answers, but I was done explaining myself to people who'd never met me. I was done being a character in someone else's story. On day 31, she'd discover what reality looked like without an audience to perform for, and I'd be long gone. Day 31 arrived with poetic justice. She called me at 7 o'clock in the morning, sobbing. The water heater broke, she said between tears, and I can't figure out how to reset the breaker. The internet is out, too. I almost laughed. After weeks of declaring her independence and documenting my supposed incompetence, reality had delivered a crash course in actual competence. Call a plumber, I said. I don't know any plumbers. You always handled that stuff. Because I was controlling and didn't let you learn, right? Silence. The internet company wants to charge me $300 for an emergency visit, she continued. I thought you were just being cheap when you said we should wait for regular appointments. Anything else? I asked. The car is making that noise again, and I can't remember which mechanic you trusted. She'd spent a month telling the internet that I was manipulative for handling household maintenance. Now she was discovering that someone had to handle it, and it wasn't going to handle itself. "You'll figure it out," I said. "You're a strong, independent woman. Remember. Don't be like that." "Like what?" "Like someone who believes what you spent a month telling the world about yourself." She was quiet for a moment. "I made mistakes. You made choices. I lost followers when I deleted everything. People are saying I was lying about you. Were you?" "I was interpreting things differently. You were creating content. There's a difference. I know that now." 2 weeks later. 2 weeks later, she called again. This time, she was crying for different reasons. "I got fired," she said. "What happened?" "Someone at work saw the videos before I deleted them. HR said it reflected poorly on the company's values." The irony was perfect. She tried to destroy my reputation and ended up destroying her own career instead. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. "No, you're not." "I am. I never wanted you to hurt yourself trying to hurt me. I don't know what to do. I can't afford the house payments alone." "Sell the house." "That's our house." "No, that's a house where I used to live with someone who secretly recorded me for social media content." I said I was sorry. Being sorry doesn't undo the damage. "So that's it. 3 years of marriage and you're just done. 3 years of marriage and 30 days of public humiliation. You chose which one mattered more." She tried a different approach. "What if I got therapy? What if I proved I could change?" "Change for who?" "Me. Your followers. The next guy. For yourself. Then do it for yourself. Not to win me back. But I love you. You love the validation more. And when you had to choose, you chose the validation. That's not fair." "Fair. You recorded private conversations and edited them to make me sound abusive. You invited strangers to our home to interrogate me. You built an entire online presence around destroying my character." I was confused. "You were performing. And when the performance ended, you expected the audience to disappear and everything to go back to normal. But it didn't work that way." "No, it didn't." 6 months later, I heard she'd moved back in with her parents. The house had sold, but after the divorce settlement and legal fees, there wasn't much left. Her social media accounts were mostly dormant. The followers had moved on to the next drama. She'd learned what every performer eventually learns. The audience is fickle, and the stage is temporary. I'd learned something, too. Self-respect isn't negotiable. Love without respect is just emotional manipulation with better marketing. The woman I married had disappeared into an algorithm designed to monetize outrage. She traded our real relationship for a performance that generated clicks, views, and validation from strangers. When the performance ended, there was nothing left. No marriage, no career, no followers, no content. Just a woman who'd forgotten who she was and trying to become who the internet told her to be. I rebuilt my life without an audience. No cameras, no documentation, no need to perform my happiness for strangers. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I'd refused to be a villain in someone else's story. Some battles aren't worth fighting. Some relationships aren't worth saving. And some people aren't ready to choose reality over performance. On day 31, she faced reality. But by then, I was already living in it without her. Our story has come to an end. If you've made it this far, how about subscribing? It helps us immensely. I've selected 2 other videos for you that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Feel free to click on them. I'll be waiting for you in the next story. See you soon.